Nice try.
Beatboxing.
Start beatboxing. Now, I know there's probably a few different questions that you may have. First one and most obvious one being, hey Jay, why are you bald? You know, I didn't have an idea going into this. I just realized this would be the first video I was bald. I started a new channel and we had a sub goal and we hit that sub goal and I promised to shave my head live on stream, which went like this. So if you guys want to see content like that, please go to the other channel and subscribe to it because new videos are coming to that soon, but that's not what you came here for today. Today, we're finally getting back to the last bit of Crown of Candy. Now, this is a topical conversation because actually the Ravening War, the prequel campaign to A Crown of Candy is premiering on Dimension 20 right now, DM'd by Matthew Mercer, so perfect time to do it. Though when I chose to review this campaign, I didn't know that was gonna happen, just a happy little accident. But I did promise a third video, and it's because I knew I wanted to talk about something in particular, and that's player conflict. See, player conflict is going to be something that is always going to be a stumbling stone for any DM, no matter your caliber. Whether you're Matthew Colville, Matthew Mercer, or Brennan Lee Mulligan, whether you're Abria Iyengar or Griffin McElroy, it doesn't matter how long you've spent doing this. Player conflict is going to be difficult.
No, yes. I summon the belch and I hold it right up to his throat.
You have to detect that I did it.
Did you reach for it?
Of course
I was the last one out of the room. Put it.
Make a perception. Make a perception.
Yes.
Make
I was up here first.
Make a perception check. Make a sleight of hand check. Yeah. That's what this is for.
I said I was the last one in that room.
You were.
Specifically, I'm actually talking about character conflict, but character conflict is inherently tied to player conflict. And there's a few different reasons for that. See, when we create our characters, we put a portion of ourselves into them. It's just kind of part of the game. In order to experience new things, we as humans have to rely on previous experiences. We're not really capable of completely new and unique thoughts. Our brains are made to be able to build on top of each other. And while we can mix those two thoughts together to create a brand new thought nobody else has had, we first must have those first two thoughts. And it's the same when creating characters. We have to rely on some portion of ourselves to create a character with any monicum of interesting value to it. And because we put a portion of ourselves into those characters, when those characters come into conflict with each other, inevitably, it will be, at least in some part, the players coming into conflict with each other. Think about when you're sitting at a table and just playing a board game, and there are two particularly competitive players, and the two of them are trying to win, and they begin to conflict in the game. Somehow that starts to happen a little bit above the table too, not just at the board game that's happening. And it's the same in D&D, but amplified because of the fact that we put so much of ourselves into our characters. And so as a DM, you have to understand that that's going to happen. The reason, however, it becomes so insanely difficult is because by doing this, we can't stop the drama. We can't try and remove it. We can't try to prevent it because a story without drama is a story without stake. A story without conflict is a story without any need for resolution. And at that point, is it a story at all? What is the message you're attempting to communicate? And so with all of that behind me and explained now, let's jump into A Crown of Candy. See, there's a moment in the very last episode that kind of encompasses all of what I just discussed. It is player conflict and character conflict of the highest degree. In fact, it was even orchestrated by the Dungeon Master, Brennan Lee Mulligan. But how did that play out? How did Brennan handle it? And how did the players handle it? Now, as always, for any of my Crown of Candy videos in general, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, there's gonna be a lot of conversation about the very final conflict. Because what we're discussing is a conflict between two characters, Saccharina and Ruby. See, over the course of A Crown of Candy, there's two particular players who are at the center of much of the most important stories, and that would be Siobhan and Emily. And see, these two actually have a little bit of a difficult time because they originally start playing as twin sisters. And I've already discussed what happens to Emily's character as she dies in an incredibly tragic way, which you can watch when the card pops up there or there. I can never remember which corner it is. Point is, it creates this sort of rift when that happens, because when Emily's character dies, Emily doesn't create just a new character out of nowhere. See, the entire campaign is based around Candyland in Game of Thrones. And part of Game of Thrones is whatever new character is introduced, they must have some sort of tie to the existing stakes. It's kind of like the entire thing of the show. And so this campaign follows suit, and Emily's new character, Saccharina, is also Siobhan's character's sister. Well, at least half-sister, the bastard sister. Actually, which one of them is a bastard is pretty much up to question a lot of the times, and at the end it turns out neither of them, but that's not really the point. The point is because she is this new sister who has showed up out of nowhere that nobody expected, there's a lot of mistrust, and this inevitably leads to quite a bit of character conflict between the two players. Because, obviously, Siobhan does not want to just trust this new character. There's been so much betrayal over the course of the entire story that would be absurd. It would be absurd to just allow that to happen, but it does lead to Emily seeming to be hurt by this. In fact, we see it time and time again, and while I don't actually know, it seemed like the players were truly feuding with each other. And again, I must make it very clear, I don't know if that's the case. Unlike Critical Role, where I get to see all the little moments, even when the cameras aren't pointed at the specific players, I get to see all of their interactions, Dimension 20 is heavily edited. And that's not a criticism, I understand why it is, and it makes it far easier to obtain and access and review, but it does make reviewing the player decisions far more difficult, because I don't get to see the unique in-betweens, the relationships between the players. And even as I looked for interviews to try and see about this whole scene, I wasn't able to find a lot. So please know that this is just speculation when I say this, but it did seem like the two players were actually conflicting with each other outside of the game too, at least a little bit. In fact, you can even see this theme most often when they try to fight over the dragon egg that happens pretty later on in the campaign. In the fight with the Sugar Plum Fairy, there is a dragon egg there that they seem to constantly go back and forth on. And we can actually see that Emily attempts to be a peacemaker in this situation, but Siobhan seems to be pretty upset about it.
I suppose it's stupid that I keep trying to reach out to you. I have ranged fire attack. I made the decision to do something with you instead of try to steal it for myself. I don't know if anything I ever say will ever affect you, but maybe somewhere down the line, you'll remember I said that and you'll be at a place where you're ready to have heard it.
And again, I don't know how much of this is just them role-playing or not. I don't get to see. I can only call what I see, and that's it. And because of this, the rift continues to grow larger and larger. But what I'm talking about specifically is in the last battle, Brennan goes out of his way to intentionally foster a very antagonistic relationship between these two players and characters, which is interesting. Obviously, it's done for drama's sake, don't get me wrong. He needs there to be a larger conflict than just the end battle, because the end battle is inherently made to be won in one way or another. There needs to be something higher than that. They are, of course, a storytelling group. And so, in order to manufacture this, he has two NPCs discuss things with the other characters. He has Ruby's mother approach her and discuss the fact that Saccharina, who was supposed to be the new queen, is not actually a legitimate heir. And therefore, Ruby and her father, Amithar, could take the throne at the end of the battle, and even encourages them to find Saccharina dead in the battle. Unfortunate, but a reality of war.
Battles are chaotic and deadly things. Lots can happen in a battle. There's always a potential that certain problems can solve themselves in the chaos and destruction of combat.
You're talking about my daughter.
I am talking about the future of Candy.
Meanwhile, we have Saccharina, who is warned by her trusty companion, Swifty? I don't know if honestly we could call him that. He's pretty much a bastard in every regard.
He's gonna like it. Just
You wanna die? Life is torture!
Regardless, he does warn her that he overheard this conversation. And in fact, we even see that we have a flashback in the show where it shows Brennan rolling for Swifty's perception check, which means there's a possibility Saccharina didn't get this information. But I kind of doubt Brennan would have let that happen. This seemed to be a very planned thing. I don't think Dimension 20's shows are planned or scripted, but there are things that the Dungeon Master has to keep in mind to keep the plot progressing forward, and I think this was one of them. If it was really that important, I truly believe he would have done a Box of Doom roll. And because of this, Brennan goes ahead and goes out of his way to foster this intense relationship. Now going into the final battle, both sides know, Saccharina and Ruby know, that they both want each other dead in this battle. They both know that something is going to go down. One of them has to take the throne, and they have to decide what's going to happen. And so the battle occurs, and honestly, the battle is entertaining, but nothing super special. We do get to see a lot of cool moments, but one thing that I noticed is Siobhan does not really get the chance to have Ruby have her catharsis. See, Ruby has constantly wanted revenge over the course of the entire campaign, and we don't get to see it happen. We see Liam get the important kill that Siobhan was trying to get this whole time. We see everybody else get to fight their rivals, but Siobhan doesn't. And I think this leads to even more frustration within the player because there's no catharsis happening. This is the end of the campaign. And this leads to further and further tensions rising until the battle is over and Brennan addresses what's about to happen. He says the battle grows quiet, and he looks at the two players, and he asks something very interesting. First of all, he tells them, you look into each other's eyes and know that you both know a conflict's about to occur. He makes sure that all the information is on the table. Nothing will be led to no information. But then he does something interesting. He asks them to ignore each other so that there's absolutely no chance of them missing the communication that's about to happen. He needs to know that they are not looking at each other and overthinking things and running through all these emotions. They need to know what's about to happen.
I'm going to ask you both to look at me and not look at each other again while I'm speaking.
Okay.
In that moment, you both understand that you are aware of what the others know. And that now that your enemies lie defeated, dark and terrible things are at work.
And they discuss with him, or more specifically, he discusses with them and tells them a few specific things. He tells them what's happened, what's led up to this moment, and he tells them to both write down on a piece of paper what they're going to do. He outlines in no uncertain terms exactly what will happen. No dice rolls, no chance. He tells them, look at me. Let me explain the stakes. Let me explain the information so that there is no chance of misunderstanding. And now know, the person across the other side of the table is your friend. And the character that you are playing has stakes and motivations in this conflict that's occurring. What is more important to you in this moment? Do you both agree that there would be something more interesting happening? Or should we allow this to pass without a conflict? Now we need to understand that this is not just a character conflict, this is across both players. This is across the table. There's a human involved on the other side of it. This is very important. A lot of dungeon masters will look at conflict happening at the table between players and focus on the character conflict first, because it is their job to mediate. And I'm guilty of this too. However, when you look at it further than that, you also have to understand that there are two humans behind those characters who can sometimes get lost in translation. But on the flip side of this, it's also extremely easy to look at just the players and lose the characters. We have to understand that in this moment, we have all socially agreed to be our characters, to play this game, to tell a story. And a story is only interesting when there is resolution, when the story cohesively makes sense, when the narrative has been given the attention it deserves. You cannot ignore one part of this piece. Both sides must be understood. And that is exactly what Brennan does here. And so we get a moment of silence, of, well, frankly, suspense. We get to see the two of them try and figure out what they're going to do and write things down. And in the end, what happens? They both agree. They both decide that this is not worth pursuing, and they find a resolution. And while that is not always going to be the case, here is the thing that needed to be understood. If this was going to end badly, we have to understand that that was something that was agreed upon. Brennan set the stakes there, and they had to know what was going on. And in fact, I found an interview by Oren Cohen, which, Oren, thank you so much for interviewing Brennan in this way. And if you guys could go watch the video, it is criminally underwatched and a great interview about this campaign specifically. And in this video, he asks Brennan about the world building and about the prep for the campaign. And Brennan makes something very clear. He discusses the fact that it's important that he outlined the stakes beforehand. He let them know this campaign was not going to be fair. He let them know the world that it was being built in. And so when it led up to this conflict, the players at the table knew that fact.
What was discussed between me and the players prior to the game starting was every season has the possibility of player death. And the only difference this season was I basically told the PCs, these fights are not designed, not all of them, with fairness in mind. They are designed to be realistic to the challenges you find yourself in based on the choices you make.
And yet still he took the time to remind them and step outside the mechanics of the game to make sure that everything was taken care of. When we are playing these games, we have to remember how important it is that we care for each other. And it's interesting because in Dimension 20, I don't get to see it a lot. I'm sure that everybody's great friends. I've seen interviews where they seem to get along fabulously. But like I said, unlike shows like Critical Role or other live plays, I don't get to see the in-between moments. But we did here. We got to see it in the moment and in a very important moment. And I think it's fascinating, so fun, and perfectly beautiful. It is an important thing for everybody when playing, and something really important to remember. A Crown of Candy has been one of my favorite campaigns ever to review, and I'm so excited to go into the Ravening War. Sorry, the Ravening War, not the Ravening War. Very similar, but not the same. But the fact is I'm extremely excited to see what is done in the same setting with a different dungeon master, because things can go so differently with the same sort of set piece. And I'm so excited to see it, and if you all want to like and subscribe, because I guarantee you I will be jumping into that campaign soon, please do so. And don't forget to go out into the world and make it your own. If you want to watch the rest of the Crown of Candy videos, you can go right here and watch my whole catalog.